You're listening to the Missionary Perspective Podcast with veteran missionaries Erik Johnson and Joshua Mead. We're glad you could join us. We trust this podcast will be both a blessing and a challenge as we relate topics in world evangelism from a missionary perspective. Now, here's Josh and Erik.
Welcome back to the Missionary Perspective Podcast. This is part 2 of our interview with my dear friend, Pastor Branden Lawrence. Pastor Lawrence joined us in the last podcast. He is the associate or assistant pastor at Temple Baptist Church in Dulles, Virginia, which happens to be my sending church. And if you haven't listened to part 1 of our podcast, go back and listen to that. We cover a lot of the ground, giving some of the bio on Branden's life, how the Lord has worked in his heart over the last 20 years there at Temple, and now how he primarily serves as the music minister and missions pastor there. We talked a lot about some practical ways that Temple Baptist helps their own home missionaries get to the mission field. And I hope every missionary and pastor goes back and listens to that. We don't hold ourselves up as the only ones or the best ones, but we do feel like the Lord has taught our church some things over the years. And I do know that Temple is just one of those wonderful churches that has thought about missions and has had the blessing of many missionary families going forth from their church to serve all over the world. And so through the leadership of others and through obviously our own pastor, we've learned some things Temple has over the years of how to encourage their missionaries not only to get to the mission field, but I'll add this, Branden, as we start back up in part 2, it didn't stop there with the deputation. It really just continued on once the missionaries got to the field to coming visiting. I remember you guys coming within the first few months of us being on the mission field, and it wasn't even a construction trip. It was an evangelism trip. It was us having our very first service, and you brought people from the Spanish church, people from the English church. We had a great time. We got to share our memories, our first memories with our home church. And then even now, as we come on furlough, one of the things that you implemented years ago, buying a vehicle so that the furloughing missionaries can use it, has been one of the most tremendous blessings of savings for us. And so when the missionary gets to the mission field, even if you've helped them get there, it doesn't stop there. Isn't that right?
Amen. Amen. No, what a joy to be a part of that. You know, some of my favorite memories are memories of being with our home missionaries, and I'll never forget that little fair that we did and cleaning up the property and. Jeff Scott dressed up in a clown outfit to try to get people to come
1,000 degrees outside.
Melissa Osborne with her Spanish, Calicula Oy. I got so many great memories from that. But and then the people that that got saved and that from that first time that we were there, still seeing them in church and faithful. That's awesome. That's such a blessing, coming and visiting our missionaries on the field. It really is. Yeah.
It's so funny to think, Branden, actually this month we're celebrating 15 years of starting our first Bible study. And then in August, it'll be 15 years of that trip. And then when the church had its first service, and it is amazing to look back at how many people who really became acquainted with the church in the first few months and were actually present at that first service, and how you guys were a part of that, and how men who came on that trip and some ladies have been able to come back various times to visit the mission field. And as a missionary, obviously, it's very difficult to be a missionary if you're not well supported. It's difficult if people aren't praying for you. But a third rung, I think, for supporting your missionaries, when possible, whether it's your home missionary or one you just support as a church, is going to visit your missionary. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, of Branden's experiences now as a missions pastor, not just, contacting and daily dealing with missionaries with phone calls and emails and texts, but, Branden, for many years now, has been in charge of the men's construction trips, which is very detailed. They come in like a sniper force of tools, and you wouldn't believe the amount of tools, and they bring on these groups trips, and I know the weeks of planning that goes with Branden and my dear friend Richard and others who prepare for these, so they can go into these remote areas where they don't have these kinds of tools and help do amazing things in just a few amount of days. And so as we kind of start on this, the practical side, where you get to go and visit the missionary. Let's start with this question. Having visited so many mission fields and spent so much time with missionaries in their home and understanding their culture in the short time you get to, what do you think the average church member, because you were an average church member, and then you got be a assistant pastor, but then you get to go on these missions trips. What do you think the average church member who loves missions, loves when missionary comes, but they have never been to visit a missionary? What do you think that it's still hard for them to understand what the day in, day out struggles of a missionary? And how can we, as pastors and missionaries, convey that to those who pray and give?
Yeah, that's good. You know, I don't know that the average person sitting in the pew, even me, is gonna ever fully understand
Sure.
the struggles that missionaries go through. But you know, it is good for us to get a better understanding so that we pray better for these missionaries. We connect with them, you know, because some of it's loneliness. I think that's one of the things we just can't fathom, you know, sometimes the loneliness. I mean, going on those mission trips, I'm always struck. You know, we're there for a week and it's great. You know, we've enjoyed the food, or the fellowship, the hard work, the sweating together, people getting saved, and then, but then you know, there for me, it's time to go home. You know,
Mhm.
and every time I go on a trip, I look back at the missionaries we're leaving them, and I think, you know, they're staying here. You know,
Mhm.
and it's their home. I think you guys probably look at it like this is home, you know,
Mhm.
but for me, I look at it like, man, you know, we're going home and they're still here by themselves, you know. And so I think that loneliness, um, maybe the feeling of being disconnected
Mhm. That's
with
a good
what's
one.
going on back home, even in your home church, you know, and
Yeah.
people are busy and it's not anybody's fault. It's just
Yeah.
everybody's doing their thing. And so, you know, a missionary wife, you know, who does
Mhm.
she had the fellowship with on the field? And the missionary, I mean, you're a pastor in essence on the field, and it's not like you
Mhm.
can share all your burdens with the people that you're ministering to.
Mhm.
It's a different kind of relationship. So I think, you know, keeping relationships with people back in the States for the missionaries that are listening, that's really important. And there's
Yeah.
some work to that, and there's some, you know, it
Yeah.
takes time to do that. But I thank God for my friendship with you, Eric. You know, and some
Mhm.
of my best friends are missionaries on the field, and I don't know how, you know, most of my best friends are Cowboy fans, and I'm a Redskin fan.
I was
But
just
anyhow,
thinking that.
I don't know how,
I was just
I don't know
thinking
how that happens.
that.
Maybe it's the Lord has. I have this gift of sympathy, and so I feel bad for these Cowboy fans and become friends with them. I had to get that. I had to get that in. But
Absolutely.
no, I think most people don't understand the difficulty of learning a new language,
Yeah.
and going to another culture. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we hear that and we
Yeah.
understand that, like, but we don't understand the level of difficulty that that carries. And, you know, it's different for different people. You know, learning a
Mhm.
language for some people comes a little quicker. For other people, I mean, there's some people, some guys that don't ever really get it great, you know, but
Yeah.
they keep working at it. And I
Yeah.
admire that. And then learning another culture, and
Yeah.
some of those cultural things can really go against your culture and rub you the wrong way.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
I'll just give you an example. When I was pastoring a Spanish church, it was a big deal. We just had our annual meeting. Our Spanish church was putting all their things on the calendar, and a lot of the events were things like, oh, we're gonna meet on December 31st until 3 in the morning and have a big get together as a church. And we did that every year, and then we did it at Christmas time too. You know, on Christmas Eve. Well, for me, those are family times, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and 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 if we're staying up late, it's because we're wrapping gifts, not because we're at church, but that's that culture. And boy, that was difficult for me because that really intruded on my family culture, what I grew up in, versus what their culture is. You know, they want to
Yeah.
be together, you know, all these special times when to me those are like family time. So it's a myriad of those kind of things. You obviously could speak more about it, but that we don't get, you know, we don't understand. I think missionaries have to be careful not to. There's a balance in this, right? We want
Mhm.
the people back in the pew to understand how to pray better, but we don't want missions to become a negative thing in people's hearts and minds. And there,
Absolutely.
and so, you know, in your prayer letters, yes, there's some missionaries. It ends up being a very, and I don't want to judge because they're going through tough
Yeah.
times and they're just sharing their heart. But writing people back home, you have to have a balance of your trust in the Lord. And there's a lot of positive things to focus on too. So I think you have to balance that out, and you're as a missionary in your updates and whatnot. But things, how can you present that in a balanced way to a church where someone's not like, I don't ever want to be a missionary, hearing all those problems, and there being uh, a realistic view so that they do know how to pray better, right? There's a balance there. So what are some things that we've done? Having a director come in and preach.
Oh yeah.
I'll tell you, we had Brother Baggett in.
Yes.
And he I remember it was probably 3-4 years ago. He preached a message on how to pray for missionaries that was absolutely eye-opening.
Wow.
And of course, he went through a lot of things on the mission.
Sure.
I don't know if you've ever had him on the podcast, but I mean, some amazing things and tough things. And it was eye-opening, even for me. And so, but he was careful in how he did it too. And he always showed how the Lord worked and how the Lord, but hey, this is how we got it. We got to pray for our missionaries. And that was fantastic. I think when a pastor goes to the mission field on a regular basis, he can come back and he can, he knows his people and he can communicate to his people in a way that they'll get that in a balanced way, So I think, what are some other things that your average, guy in the pew don't miss? I'll tell you one, the fact that furlough and deputation are not paid vacations. I mean, I think sometimes we just assume, they're back, they're on vacation. No, they're back reporting to churches. And I tell our missionary, I say, now listen, understand your furlough is not a vacation. You're reporting to churches. Now, if you can have some fun along the way, do it, right?
Sure.
I mean,
if you can take your assistant pastor along with you to a ball game, you can do it.
That's right. Go do it. But as a church, you do have to understand they're not back vacation, they're working. But I tell our missionary, I say, listen, you need to have a week or more, a week or two, where you have a family vacation. And by that, I don't mean going on furlough. Right. I mean, having a family vacation. Maybe you even go to another country. Maybe you go somewhere else or in that country, and you have family time. And because you guys aren't super Christians, you're not different than us. I need a vacation. I got mine coming up in 2 weeks, and I can't wait. It's my chance to recharge. And if I do that, I know I'm going to have a longevity in the ministry. I'm going to be able to come back, with even more fervency and ready to roll. And missionaries need that too, So it's those things. We think of missionaries as like these super Christians, but they're just like us. It's like when you read your Bible, you look at some of the Christians in the Bible, and you don't realize they had the same emotions, they had the same problems. They had, and I think sometimes we don't understand that, and the problems on the mission field are intensified. That I think it's not that there are different problems, but it's some of the same problems that are just much more difficult. I remember when I went to Spain, and I was with Brother Velasquez, and we had to go get some money from bank. I'll go in the bank. We'll be back in 10 minutes. It was like 4 hours. And I was like, what is that? How do you function on the mission field?
Why don't you go to the ATM?
And so what was opening my eyes in that was just the little simple things that we would do here in the United States that we would be done in 5 minutes, because we're all about efficiency, especially here in Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. area. And I thought, Lord, maybe I understand why you called me to Northern Virginia, not the mission. I would go nuts having to wait, for this guy. And then I remember one time we went to a hardware shop. I think it was with you. And you had to go and order the stuff, and then you had to take that slip to some other place, and they had to stamp it. And I don't know what that stamp did, but then you had to take that over to the cash register, pay it, then you had to go back to this. And
5 steps.
And it was just getting like a bag of screws or something. And you just spent half your day. I think, so that's one. I think another thing is just the pressure to produce results. And that's not fair. Let's just admit that's not fair. I don't have a pressure on me as a pastor here, assistant pastor, how many people I see saved.
Exactly.
I don't have a pressure on how fast our church is growing or how many churches I've planted, and I think, while again, there's balance in all of these things, right? That pressure is good in the sense it keeps us working hard and on our toes, but sometimes it's not fair to missionaries. And I think even pastors, we got to understand, a guy who goes to Europe, that's a tough field.
Absolutely.
100%. Man, if he gets a church, if he gets a decent sized church that's growing and he's got leadership in that church, man, that's what a blessing.
Man.
And so I think just understanding that they have pressures on them to produce that we don't have, and that's not really fair.
Yeah.
Let's trust that they're godly missionaries walking with God, and let's vet them that they're going to be that kind of missionary. And yeah, we'll have some things to hold them accountable. That's not a bad thing necessarily, but I think we don't realize the pressure that's on missionaries to produce. I think the challenge also for their children,
Mm.
raising children on the mission field, they're in between cultures, they're in between languages. They don't have that stable environment. Sometimes they're traveling on deputation or they're traveling on furlough, and they're meeting friends. Now they have a ton of friends,
Yeah.
they don't get to see them that often.
Yeah.
And so I think as a missionary parent, you can always bring out the positives you get. Like, you've got more
Absolutely.
friends than any kid I know,
It's true.
and when you do get to do the fun things when you're out on, you can emphasize to your kids, if your dad was a missionary, we wouldn't get to go to the art museum, or we wouldn't get to stop and see the Statue of Liberty or whatever, you do.
Exactly.
And so you want to make sure you have family time as a missionary and all that. But the challenge is, I think about missionaries dropping their kids off at college and then going back to the field. It's
I'm not trying to think of that at all right now.
yeah, right. Well, a lot of parents, I think if you're listening to this, you probably have considered how far that college is away from home. Can they get home on a weekend and visit us, and it's not getting home on a weekend for missionary kids, it may be not seeing mom and dad for a year, 2 years. They may have to stay back in the States and work a job. And, I don't think we have any comprehension of some of those things. And so that's the challenge. I think the stress on missionary marriages, because they're there on their own, carrying the burdens of all these people that they're ministering to, busy trying to produce results with God's help, but they're under all this multiplied stress. And that multiplied stress is a multiplied stress on your marriage. I mean, everybody listening to this that's married, think about the stresses of your own marriage, and then think of that multiplied being on the mission field. How's your marriage going to be? And so, the missionaries that are listening, you got to work at your marriage, and you got to make sure that you put aside family time. Don't get so busy in the ministry that you lose your family, and that you look across the table when you go to eat at night, and because you've been so busy doing everything else, that you look and say, who's that person sitting over there? The person you married, and man, that relationship next to the Lord is the most important relationship you have. And so you have to balance all that. But for us, praying for missionaries, praying for their marriages, praying for their kids, the difficulties of traveling on furlough and deputation. I often think about this when missionaries come through and we feed them to death. And I think, how do they maintain a good weight, and healthiness? I mean, because we take them out to the nicest restaurant.
Red Robin bottomless fries aren't going to help.
That's right. I always look at them and I say, now listen, guys, I know, a little bit what it's like to travel from when I was in college. And I mean this, you guys eat as little or as much as you want, but not everybody. A lot of times people are trying to shove the food down their throats, and they're offended if you don't eat it and this kind of thing. So sometimes we don't understand that. We don't understand they're tired. They've been they don't know where they were last week, and you ask them where they're coming from, and they have to take a minute to think about it. They're sort of in this whirlwind of traveling all over the place, and a different pillow and a different bed. And those beds aren't always comfortable. I like my bed, brother. And as I get older, I love my bed more,
Exactly.
And every time I travel, I think about missionaries. And I think about, man, this bed's not comfortable. How many beds do missionaries have to sleep on that aren't comfortable? And so it's all those we just don't think about it. We really don't. It's not that we don't care. It's just that we're not always familiar. How can they become more familiar with it? Go to the mission field. Go on a mission trip. I think a person in your church going on a mission trip is the most eye-opening thing to help understand what missionaries go through. But
all those things are 100% correct, and I wish I could go back and remember all of them because I wanted to comment on all of them. But they're all very, very good. Especially that last point about going on the mission trip. Really, it started, like you mentioned, your pastor going on the mission trip, and though our pastor last time he was on a mission trip here, he cut his leg open and had to get 18 stitches. We're very thankful he still came. He didn't lose his life. We're so thankful for that. He comes and he goes on mission trips and he gets on the roofs. He's in there. He's at it. And
go.
It starts with the leadership. It starts with the pastor, and then it filters down, having the assistant pastors like yourself and other pastors over the years who have led those missions trips. Just this week, Branden, one of the Southeast director for BIMI is in India, and he's been sending out pictures of the church that Holly and I went as singles and that trip.
Oh, wow.
And the pews are still there. The church is full. The missionary, the wife, and the daughter are serving there. I mean, that filled my soul to see those photos. But I was remembering those initial times. I was just your average church guy going there. Thought it'd be a good thing to do, and the Lord, transformed my life through that. Now, not everybody goes on a mission trip, has their life transformed in that way, but they will have it transformed in the sense of understanding how to better pray for missionaries. You mentioned this in passing, but I think it's a great point. One of the things that was a highlight of our kids' lives was 2 years ago when we were home on furlough. They got to go with the Temple teens to camp. It's not something we even really thought about. It just the confluence of events allowed it to happen. And I thought, man, that's something I want to tell other missionaries. Be intentional about thinking about things like camp that you may not have thought about. Your kids can be a part of planning a furlough. And so I think Temple does a great job of by coming on the missions trip, sending guys who oftentimes, are computer programmers or work in different fields. They're not necessarily construction geniuses, but the Lord uses those trips to really connect those families forever to the missionaries and mission fields. And it's just really neat how you sometimes will make a friend forever who comes on that trip, who will pray for you, who will just check in on you. With social media, it's never been easier to reach out to people on the other side of the world. And so I think that is kind of the key, is just constantly having that in front of people. And you bring up a good point. Missionaries, for the most part, we don't really want to talk about the negative. We really do want to talk about the positive, because if you tend to talk about the negative, it makes you depressing. But it's good. And, like you mentioned, coming and visiting, some of my fondest memories, even though are the big services we've had and the buildings, but even some of my most precious memories are like sitting on our carport, playing dominoes and having laughs and watching football games, even if our team loses. And it doesn't really matter. Just those times we have forever.
They got crushed. I remember that.
Really help the missionaries. Have that bond, that know that people have their back, and that they would spend their time and their money and their vacation to come visit. It means a lot. And we know people can't do that all the time. It has to be in the right time, but that goes a long way in helping missionary. Well, with that in mind, maybe I ask you to think of some fun memories you've had from all over the world, like maybe a fun or a funny memory you've enjoyed and some of your trips. You maybe even tell some of the names of the countries you've visited. I know they're far flung.
Oh man. Well, there's a ton of memories. It's overwhelming. But the first thing I think about is the food I've had all over the place, and it's funny because growing up, Eric, I was like the most picky eater,
Me too.
I mean, I was the most picky eater, and our family was a picky eating family. But when I traveled in college, with the singers, I had to learn to branch out, because you couldn't say no to people when they offered you food. But then going to the mission field, it's just learning to try something and getting past, what the idea of what you're eating, whatever. But I know my wife, growing up in Senegal, she fixes Senegalese food, and I love it. Now, when we got married, I made her promise me that if she was going to fix me something different, she would warn me about it. And I'll tell you the weirdest thing that my parents eat, and it's not even from the mission field. It's what they ate in South Carolina growing up. But they put pork brains in their eggs. Have you heard of that before?
No, that's a new one for me. Oh my!
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's why my father-in-law is so smart, but I'll do something else to get smart. But no, their food. So I got to go to Senegal and had the food there. That was awesome, and eating it with your hands and all that experience. The chebbijen, and and then churros in Dominican.
Oh, yes,
Uh,
yes.
it's funny. My wife jokes with me because like when I think back, this is true. Like I think different people learn differently. Some people are visual learners. Some people learn auditory. I think that I have a new way of learning. I think my learning is through eating. And so, like, all my memories of where I've been, what church I was with, I remember it by what I ate there. I kid you not. And
I'm not
so,
far from
you know,
that.
man, I'll tell you, if you get to go visit Erik in the Dominican, they got the most amazing churros there, chocolate dipped churros and cookies and cream filled, I love that that donut shop you have near there. But hey, you get me hungry, brother. We got a little ways to go before we can do anything about that.
Well,
but
it's neat to see. It's the places you've been able to go to, and you've probably seen more than most people get to see in a lifetime.
Yeah, I'd say some of the memories though are the spiritual memories. I remember I was in a hut in Peru off of the Ucayali River out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, 14 hours down this river by way of a boat. And I was in this hut and I was getting ready to preach in the church, and all of the kids of the church came in the hut. And I was trying to study for my message. And so they come in and they're just crowded. It's a small little hut room, and they're in there all crowded around me. And they're just looking at me, staring at me. And they're all quiet. No one's talking. And I'm trying to study. I mean, it's like I got all these eyes on me, and there must have been like 40 of them crowded in this little hut. And so I just stopped studying. I was like, hey, do you guys like to sing? And they're all like, yeah, yeah. I said, well, can you guys sing me a song? Oh, Erik, you should have heard it, man. The singing, those kids, they just sang out with all their heart, didn't care what anybody else thought. It was so beautiful. I'll never forget that moment. You know, of course, I'm a music pastor as well. So I remember the orphanage. I was with Jeremy in Uganda, Jeremy Fitman, and he had like a sing inspiration with the orphans there, and hearing those kids sing was another experience just like that. But I think about, you know, just the moments with the missionaries. We went to Sean Lundy's church down in Sao Paulo, and this is different. We normally build church buildings a lot of times, or medical building or something, you know. But in this case, he had started doing some remodeling on his house, and the guy that he had paid money ran off with his money and left his roof open to the air.
Wow.
And so, you know, rain's coming in, ruining their furniture, and they needed. So we went down there, and we did some stuff on their church, but we made a second project to finish their house off. And I remember we got done, and we found one Outback in Sao Paulo, and we got 2 steak meals. We got some candles. We put a table in that upper room that we'd finished, and we all lined up. It was sort of like a makeover edition kind of thing. And they came walking through, and we're all standing there, and they're bawling, looking at, you know, the house. We're all bawling. I mean, I got these big construction guys, and they're just sobbing, you know. And then they went in and had this special meal together. That is just a memory, you know, just so being able to be a blessing to the mission. I tell you, being at the Dominican this last time, that was a memory I'll never forget. We got to go back to the 2 churches we built and be in those churches and services, and that we don't always get that opportunity. That's sort of neat. And just, you know, when we build those buildings, they're empty when we build them, right? They're sort of raw. And then to see, you know, people saved and baptized and discipled and growing in the Lord and ministry and leadership. And then, you know, like I remember in your church, we all lined up and all your people came by and thanked us. And I mean, again, we're, you know, I couldn't help but just weep to see what the Lord's done in Ari's church, you know? And so that was special. And there's the times, you know, there's dangerous things that you go through. I remember almost dying, and off the Amazon River, I fell through a house. Richard Dean was with me. I fell through the house. They don't make their joists close together. So their joists, instead of like 16 inches, are like 5 feet. So when you walk on their floor, of course, you know, all the muscle that I got, you know, I weigh a little more. Yeah, sure. But, you know, you walk on their floors and you sort of go down and up. Well, he had handed me this case of medicine that weighed 50 pounds, along with my own weight. And as soon as he handed it, I shot right through the floor. And thank the Lord, my arms hit the sides and I was hanging there. My feet were dangling, but below me was 30 feet down to some jagged rocks, because it was a river hut right off the Amazon River. And so there's this steep incline. And I mean, we were 17 hours upriver. If I had fallen down there, I might have been impaled. I would have probably broken both my legs and bled out. I mean, it was, so there were the dangers that the Lord kept us safe in. And I don't want to tell too many of those because no one's ever going to go to the mission field if I keep going. But those are the real things, again, that missionaries go through. But I think about the opportunities to preach, and just seeing the Lord work and tenderness and the people's hearts. A lot of times they don't have a lot. I remember being in Uganda, and it was Christmas time, and one of the guys got up and he said, I was really worried about being able to have a present to give to the Lord. And but the Lord I don't have anything. I don't have a job. And it was one of those things you'd hear like maybe in some preacher's illustration, but he basically just said, and with tears in his eyes, I don't have anything to give but myself to the Lord, and he's saying it in that Uganda accent. I'm just like, wow, and then the fellowship with people all around the world, Christians, this is what heaven's going to be like, and the fellowship I've had in China with the people that have gotten saved there, maybe through a translator or through my Google Translate, was just as sweet as a fellowship that I had with you or with people here back in church. And that's just like a taste of heaven. So I could go on and on and on. There's so many memories being on the mission field.
I think a key thing too is talking about all those memories. They came because, you got on an airplane and went. And I think that's the exciting. The more you invest your time, your treasure, your talent into anything, that is lasting, like, world missions, I think you're just going to want more and more of it. And I think that's the thing we want to, as missionaries, as pastors, we want the average person who's listening to say, get involved in some way. You have a chance to go visit or communicate. The Lord's just going to keep, revealing more opportunities. And I think your taste is just going to be like Brandon and I's taste for churros. So as we conclude, we have a few minutes left here. Brandon, just give me about 2 minutes here. What's something as a missions pastor that's, going across the world, talking to missionaries all the time, sending out missionaries, what's something you're very excited about world evangelism day? Even, future people from your family going to be missionaries.
Yeah. Andrew's going to be with you this summer for an internship, missions internship. Yeah. He's open the missions, and Josiah's praying about what the Lord would have him do. I think the things that are exciting is that it's like the old statement, the darker the night, the brighter the light. Yep. And, it's exciting times to live in. I feel like we're living in the last times, and the Bible talks about the latter rain. I just think that there's the Lord's hand's not slack that it can't save, and he's still saving people, and just hearing reports of people getting saved all over the world, and of people, of churches being planted. God's still doing great things, and that's always encouraging to hear. I think just the hunger of churches to support missionaries. Now we'll see there's a dearth of missionaries out there, but I talk to missionaries, they're getting through deputation a lot quicker. That's great. That is. I think some of that's because maybe there's not as many missionaries out there to support, but I think it's also because I've heard of other churches, their mission support going up. And so while we do need more people to go, it's great to see churches that are hungry to give the missions, and just the open doors that the Lord gives. I think about Papua New Guinea, and their invitation to have BIMI, Baptist International Missions and Missionaries, present Bibles to every kid in their schools. What? Yeah. And sometimes I get burdened for America when I go on these trips, because a lot of times we get to go into public schools and preach the gospel outright. I remember in Honduras, we had a whole day where we went to schools and kept preaching the gospel. And I thought, man, you can't do that back in the States, and who knows, maybe we're in need of missionaries to come our direction, from other countries at some point. But I'm so excited to see, countries that have opened up, maybe even countries that were closed and that have opened up, and God uses circumstances. I think about Ukraine, and we have a missionary, that was going to go in Ukraine, and they couldn't go in there, but they're in Romania, and they're reaching tons of Ukrainians that are flooding out of Ukraine. And so sometimes God shakes people's lives so that they'll be open to the gospel. And you just see God at work, and that's what's encouraging. God's still on the throne. He's still working. He's still saving. He's still calling. Are we going? That's the question. Are we being faithful?
Amen.
But it's awesome to see what God's doing.
Well, I agree, and it's so exciting to be a part of a church that really loves missions and missionaries. And we here at the Missionary Perspective Podcast, our job is not to do anything other than just to kind of tell the people about what the Lord has allowed us to experience and encourage other missionaries. And I do believe that Temple is doing those things right and wants to continue to do them right. And we're excited about the future for Temple. We feel like it's just the next stage. God's done some amazing things there, and He's got more young people surrendering to the call. And so we're so glad to be part of that church. Glad you are there right along with us. I count you as a dear friend in the Lord, and thank you for being here today. Josh is preparing himself to go back to Senegal in the next couple of weeks, and he'll be having some podcasts coming out. We have some more interviews coming out. If you want to like or subscribe or share our podcast, please pass it along. Once again, it's a podcast where we're just really talking about perspectives. It's not an authoritative podcast. It's one that just says, hey, this is our experience. And we try to have people like Branden on who are have experience, but positive experience that can pass along practical knowledge. So thanks, Branden, for being a part of the podcast. Thank you, listener. Please take time to like, share, and subscribe to our podcast here on YouTube. It might be tough to watch Branden and I on YouTube, but you can always put it in your earbuds and listen to MP3 if that's tough. But thanks again, Branden, for being here. We pray that everyone has a blessed day.